alive. Still works. I want to add to the readings. I want to pull something out of the Old Testament because, when Jesus was inviting his friends to be hospitable, this wasn't a new thing. It's just something that people have difficulty doing well and regularly. That's Minnesota Twins tickets. That's not the one. Here we go. From Deuteronomy chapter 10. So now, Israel, what do you think God expects from you? Just this. Live in his presence with holy reverence. Follow the road he set out for you. Love him. Serve God, your God, with everything you have in you. Obey the commandments and regulations of God that I'm commanding you today. Live a good life. And here we start to get to what I'm talking about. Look around you. Everything you see is God's, the heavens above and beyond, the earth and everything in it. But it was your ancestors who God fell in love with. He picked their children, that's you, out of all the other peoples, and that's why you're here right now. So cut away the thick calluses from your heart. Stop being so willfully hard-headed. God, your God, is the God of all gods. He's the master of all masters, a God immense and powerful and awesome. He doesn't play favorites, takes no bribes, makes sure orphans and widows are treated fairly, takes loving care of foreigners by seeing that they get food and clothing. You must treat foreigners with the same loving care. Remember, you were once foreigners in Egypt. Reverently respect God, your God. Serve him, hold tight to him. Back up your promises with the authority of his name. He's your praise. He's your God. He did all these tremendous and staggering things that you saw with your own eyes. So the invitation for us is one that we will take up and think about and talk about today, about how it is that we can be radical in our hospitality towards one another, but in the context of these readings, to the world at large. From the beginning of time, I think human beings, our ancestors, have struggled with what it means to be able to take care of yourself, meet your own needs, and at the same time, be fully aware that there are others who have needs and that you have the ability to help them meet their needs. So how do you both look inward and look outward at the same time? That's a tension that was being described in that reading from Deuteronomy. How these people who were trying to figure out what it meant to be in covenant with God, because one of the covenant was to build a strong relational community, to have that intimate connection with one another and with God, but at the same time, to be able to look out and to care for those who aren't a part of that circle of faith that you're in. God is inviting people to think about how to be authentic in your faith and at the same time be hospitable to those who are outside of that relationship. Paul has similar thoughts when we read from his letter to the Roman church or the Roman community. He says to take your everyday, your ordinary life, to give it to God. Let your love be genuine. Extend hospitality to others, especially those outside your circle of friends and family. So these biblical encouragements come at us time and time again, inviting us to think about our own personal faith practices and our communal, our congregational faith practice as well. How is it that we can invite the world to understand that our love, our response to God's love and grace is a reflection that we share out in the world as well, that it's not meant only for those who are a part of the closed community. So as church leaders, whether we're lay leaders or ordained, we've long struggled with that same tension. How do we care for each other within the definition of church and at the same time reach out to those who don't have that relationship in their lives? And an example of that, a number of years ago, there was a process in place in the United Methodist Annual Conference where clergy were encouraged to take one day a month. It was called Clergy Day Apart. And at the minimum, they wanted you to take it apart from your congregational responsibilities. So it was kind of a Sabbath day set aside one day out of 30. But they also put some process around it, and so they encouraged clergy as well to gather together as often as they could on that one day apart with other clergy. And we would support one another, and we would worship together, and we would do things that we normally wouldn't have time to do. And I remember at one of those, we had an exercise that was geared around this very tension we feel of doing something that we really like and enjoy versus something that we're not as familiar with. Kind of like it's the tension between being an introvert and an extrovert. How many people here are extroverts? One almost raised his hand back there. See, we don't oftentimes declare ourselves as extroverts. I'm an introvert, but I'm only one tick off of the midline. So I can usually overcome that introvertedness and stand up here and celebrate our faith together. But a quick definition, an introvert, when they're doing something like I'm doing, it draws energy away from them, and they're tired after they've had to be extroverted for a while. Where an extrovert, they walk away from something like this, and they're pumped up. They gain energy from that process. So you kind of get that? So that's part of the tension that goes on as well. But anyway, in this exercise, the goal was to help us understand that we have connections or preferences that connect us to different practices, and sometimes they don't make rhyme or reason, because one time you'll choose something that's more extroverted in nature, another time something that's more comfortable, more introverted. Introverts like to have the small group, the same group, week by week, because they know what's coming, so to speak. And extrovert likes to have a new setting on a regular basis. So the questions that were asked, and I didn't write them down at the time, and I probably don't have them right at all, but I think I have the gist of it. I'll give you 3 of them. If we all stood up and stood down the center line of the aisle, all facing forward in one straight solitary row, then at each question that was asked, you would choose to either go to the left or to the right. And the point was to see, what does the group look like after each question, and how does that inform us in what we like to do and don't like to do in our faith practices. So imagine yourself standing in the main aisle. Choose between being a Sunday school teacher, closed group, same bunch all the time, or being the leader in an after-school program. Oh, we have an after-school program starting up, don't we? Where you've got a group of kids coming in that you probably don't know any of them. You don't necessarily have that same faith connection. And so that takes a different amount of energy, a different connection point for you. So some of you would have moved towards being a Sunday school teacher. Others would have went, well, this sounds exciting. I'll try the after-school program. So right away, we've got the group is separated left and right. Then the next question would be something like, choose between singing in the choir or being part of the UMW or something that is already in place and comfortable, or being a life coach for someone that you've never met before. Those are 2 very different things. Being in a comfortable group that's already in place and you have an agenda, and being a life coach with someone you don't know and perhaps have absolutely nothing in common with. Well, what happened in that clergy group, and what would probably happen here as well, is the same people that were attracted to that small group might not be this time, because they might go, well, I have some sense of skill set that I can share with somebody who's trying to figure life out. And so the group changes around. You don't all take another step to the left or all another step to the right. And so it changes, but you still end up, we did at least, about 50-50. Last question I'll give you is this one. Joining a church Bible study group, and we have a number of them here in our congregation, or giving time to help a non-church member with any assortment of chores. Cleaning up their backyard in the spring, or helping them go shopping once a month, or whatever that is. But again, somebody that you don't know and that you have to build a relationship with. And once again, those pastors shuffled around, and I wouldn't doubt our congregation would do the same thing. And I guess the point being is that we're not all built the same. But all these have some small invitation to be connected. Some require a greater amount of friendliness or hospitality or openness to being connected, where others you can just fit in and it's much easier for you to do. So start to think about your comfort range. Well, I bring all this up because the pastors of every congregation have a similar issue that they deal with. And I would bet that if we got the SPPRC, that's the formal name of the SPRC, if we got them to stand up here and I asked them the question, do you want me to spend more time in administrative function or more time out in the world visiting church members, visiting people that we don't know, going door to door, inviting people into our congregation? There would be a split. Not everybody would agree. And they would all want to define it specifically. Well, when I wrote this sermon down, I tried to distance myself from that. Here's what I wrote. I recall a conversation with a colleague who was caught up in this very struggle to identify who we are as a church and what we do. Well, I'm that colleague, so I might as well admit it right off the bat. And one of the first churches I served, there was a gentleman who was an excellent businessman. He had a great heart for the church, and he was very practical. So he came to me one day, and he said, we'd been there, I don't know, probably 3 months, so about the time we've been here now. And he says, I've heard a couple of people say that they'd like you to be more engaged in the community. Go out and visit our shut-ins and join a couple of organizations like, Kiwanis or Rotary or something like that. Show up at the events that are going on, like in this case, it'd be Apple Fest coming up. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And within a few months, I was a member of the Lions Club, which he happened to be a member of as well. Maybe that was part of his ulterior motive. I was invited to be on the board of trustees, for the local care center, and I got on that, and that was a great experience. And went to various events and functions that were going on in town. And a few months later, he came into the office, and he says, Pastor, I got a bone to pick with you. He says, every time I come here, I can't find you. You're never in the office anymore. We can't, it's hard to have it both ways. And we are always living in that struggle because we have, in some sense, a choice to make every day on where we spend our time. And we know that for those of us who are quite busy, we know that something is always going to get shortchanged. In the context of pastoral duties here, it's either administrative function or it's those one-on-one relationships that are so important. And so sometimes you have to make choices. How can I reach the most number of people and make sure that everybody is being fed at the same time? It's a difficult situation, so I invite you somewhat selfishly and humbly to pray for me and for our church leaders as we keep continuing to work that out, because it's an important part of who we are, trying to make sure everybody recognizes that they are an important part of this congregation. Well, this sense of what it takes to fulfill God's purpose for us brings us to the point of having a set of practices that we apply and that we grow better at day by day. And that's what this worship series is all about. Last week we talked about being generous, but not just generous in a comfortable sense, but being extravagantly generous. And not just extravagantly generous in the sense of writing a bigger check on Sunday morning. While it's important to have your support, be commensurate with your faith and your loyalty to God through this congregation, it's extravagantly generous with your time and your prayer life and the time you give to grow more faithfully in your relationship with God and with others. So we did that, and this week we're going to be talking about this issue of hospitality. And I don't know a church, at least I haven't been in one yet, that doesn't describe themselves as friendly and as welcoming. Has anybody ever been in a church that said, we're a nasty bunch of people, you really don't want to be around us? No. I mean, we look in the mirror and we go, yeah, we're pretty nice and we like each other, and we do. And we're going to unpack that a little bit in a minute. But recognize that being friendly and being welcoming isn't the same as being radically hospitable. It's important for us to hold that up, because if we try to conflate them together, we will become less than what God wants us to be as an inviting and open congregation. So just keep that in mind. Hospitality requires us, I think, to really respond to that gracious love of Christ that grows in us, that respects the dignity and the needs of others, that expresses God's invitation to others as an extension of our own invitation. You know, oftentimes when we are being hospitable in a radical way, it's really God working through us. Most of us, that's not an innate ability that we have. It's one that grows and grows as our relationship with God grows. So it's kind of a response, an outward expression of what's going on in our hearts as God is working through Jesus.